Hello again to another Agricultural Reacts. Today we're watching how the caste system is stopping India's takeoff from Visual Politic Ian. So from August this year, 2023. So let's just go into it and just see what's going on in India.
The 24th of April 2023 was not just any day, it was a day that went down in history. For the first time in many centuries, China officially ceased to be the most populous country in the world. On that day, the UN declared that in the next update of its population estimates, India would surpass China to take first place in the ranking of countries with the largest populations. In other words, India is by far the most populous country on the planet at the moment. According to the United Nations, more than 1.4 billion people live in India today, a figure that is expected to grow to almost 1.7 billion by the middle of the century. The countries on the screen will be the new demographic giants, and as you can see, leading all of them, and by far, will be India. It's an emerging economy with a discreet but active nuclear arsenal and a political presence that has begun to take off in recent years. Visual Politic viewers, India wants to capitalize on its status as the most populous country on Earth, and so now is seeking, among other things, to have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Even so, if instead of looking abroad we focus on the domestic matters of the country, we will find very different realities. For example, the caste system in this country is something of a popular mystery. Much is known about its existence, but not so much about how it actually works and what its consequences are. Because yes, in a way, the caste system still exists even though it has been decades since the law made it a target. And that has caused us at Visual Politic to ask ourselves a few questions. To what extent does the caste system still operate? How exactly does it work in modern India? Could this phenomenon be a kind of Achilles heel, capable of preventing the world's most populous country from prospering? Well, in this new Visual Politic video, we're going to try to find all the answers to those questions. So, let's get cracking. Lately, India has been catching on and is starting to make big headlines like these ones.
India wants key supply chain role as firms shift from China. 30 April 2023, why everyone in business loves India right now. 21 June 2023, legendary emerging markets investor Mark Mobius, who's known for his bullish views on China, is now setting his sights on India.
What's more, this emerging superpower has a relatively stable political system. From 2004 to date, there have only been two prime ministers. Firstly, Manmohan Singh of the Indian National Congress, and now Narendra Modi of the Indian People's Party. In other words, regardless of how controversial these political figures might be, the truth is that the system of government seems to be quite stable and predictable, two ingredients that are highly appreciated by foreign investors. So basically, India seems to have all the traits of a rising power: a growing economy, a growing military arsenal, a key geopolitical role between the West and the East, and a reasonably good relationship with Washington, Moscow, and even Beijing. At least as good as they could be if we take into account the historical mistrust between the two Asian giants. Nevertheless, I don't know. There is something that seems off to me. Wanting to be a rising power that in addition aspires to achieve the same economic success that the Asian dragons had, and then at the same time maintaining a system that classifies the population according to which caste or lineage they belong to, that doesn't really seem to add up, does it? But what exactly are castes? Basically, we are talking about the mother of all bureaucracies, a social order from which it is very difficult to escape, a very ancient form of social organization. We can trace its existence as far back as 3,000 years before Christ. Basically, this system consists of dividing people into different social groups known as castes, and it is hereditary. That is, if you are born into a caste, you usually remain in it for the rest of your life. Originally, castes were defined through varna, a word that in the Sanskrit language that translates as color, although in this case it does not refer to skin but to social classification, a classification that traditionally conditioned your whole life, the jobs you could do, who you could be related to, your role in society, and so on and so on. In this way, an attempt is made, or at least was made, to structure society as a whole.
Hindus divide people according to their past lives. At the top are the Brahmins, the priests and scholars. Then the Kshatriyas are the rulers and soldiers. soldiers. Below them are the Vaishyas, that is, the merchants and traders, and then the Shudras, the workers. Finally, the Dalits are the untouchables, considered impure and unclean, unworthy of belonging to any caste. By tradition, they are the lowest link.
The fact is that all people born into a particular caste already have an assigned role in their social life. That is to say, they are faced with predetermined social and economic steps. And be careful, because we are talking about a classification that, besides the 4 major castes, actually has about 3,000 castes and almost 25,000 subcastes. And then there are the tribes, which are another classification, and then there are people who remain outside this system and who form the group known as the untouchables, the lowest stratum of the entire society. These are people who were forced to perform work considered dirty or impure and who were often socially excluded. As you can imagine, such social levers have an enormous opportunity cost. For centuries, this system has limited social mobility like no other. Fortunately, it is now in decline. Although, as we shall see, Indian society has not yet managed to rid itself completely of this system. In fact, for many, it remains a serious problem for India's aspirations. But guess what? To understand the whole story, we have to look back slightly. We have to look at how and when this perverse system began to be challenged. So, let's get into it.
From words to deeds?
Visual politic viewers, during the British Raj, European agents themselves incorporated the Indian caste system into their system of government. They used it to allocate the various positions in local institutions, for instance. Not surprisingly, by 1920, the British themselves began to limit its use, in part to curb growing discontent with the Crown. And what can I say? It stands to reason that being born poor and not being able to hope to improve your situation, or having to resign yourself to a life very similar to that of your parents, is not really a good thing for anyone. But that was only the beginning. When India finally did manage to seal its independence, it came up with a constitution that went head on against the caste system. One article said precisely this:
The state shall not discriminate against any citizen solely on the ground of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. Article 15 of the Constitution of India, 1949.
The construction of the new nation, finally freed from British colonialism, was led for the most part by the highest castes, which have the role, precisely, of conducting the affairs of the state. Yet despite this, in the Constitution itself, they single out the caste system, prohibiting the state from making decisions based on this dreadful social classification. The first step to putting an end to it. The problem is that this is one of these matters that is easier said than done. Since then, government after government, the Indian authorities have tried to dismantle the rigid social stratification that the country was experiencing. In 1995, for example, the Untouchability Act was enacted, which criminalized caste-based discrimination in the workplace or in education. In 1976, the scope of this law was broadened, renaming it the Protection of Civil Rights Act. And so a potpourri of new rules, laws and provisions were passed until the turning point came in 1979, the establishment of the Socially and Educationally Backward Classes Commission, or it is popularly known the Mandal Commission. This commission takes its name from Babu Bindeshwari Prasad Mandal, a politician from one of the most powerful castes in the country, who was commissioned by Prime Minister Mojari Desai's government to prepare a report analysing the caste situation and to outline a policy package to reverse the enormous social stratification. Well, the report was completed in 1980 and was presented to the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which opened a fierce political and social debate. The report basically stated that despite all the legal prohibitions, the caste system was still in place, classifying and regulating the lives of hundreds of millions of Indians. What's more, he claimed that because of caste, many social groups had been left terribly behind, condemned to live in abject poverty. And keep in mind that we are not talking about a few people.
It's millions.
According to the same report, people who belonged to the lower castes or classes and were therefore the most disadvantaged by a system that in fact despised them accounted for nearly 50% of the country's entire population. To try and reverse this situation, the Mandal Commission made a number of recommendations, such as influencing quota systems and reserving at least 27% of public jobs and educational places for people from backward social classes who were not already protected. The problem is that the cost of such a plan, and above all the resistance of different political sectors to accept this report as valid, delayed the adoption of the various recommendations made. And so it was until 1989, when the Indian government enacted the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Act, further tightening measures against this kind of social classism. What's more, in 1990, the government began to implement the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. This, by the way, sparked huge protests because of what was considered a clear violation of the meritocratic principles of the Indian state. In the end, things went so wrong that the Prime Minister himself ended up resigning in November of that same year, which led to a reconsideration of the quota and reservation system. But that's not where the controversy ended. The controversy went all the way to the Supreme Court of India. In 1992, this body decides that the National Backward Classes Commission would be created and that progress would be made on the measures dictated by the Mandal Commission report, favouring, nevertheless, social and educational measures. Since then, the National Backward Classes Commission functions as an executive body through which each government channels its measures against the caste system. Put this another way, the Indian government has been fighting against this system for years. The question is, has it really managed to eradicate it? What impact do castes still have in India? Why do analysts think that they could be an impediment for the economic takeoff of this country? Well, let's find out.
Castes in the 21st century.
As we have already shown, in recent years, all governments have tried to fight against the caste system, but the truth is that it still survives in some form. It still survives today. It seems that 3 or 4 or 5 decades have not been enough to bring down a tradition that is more than 3,000 years old.
Oh yeah.
In 2011, for example, the social and economic census still showed that 4 out of 10 Indians were classified as part of the lower classes. And not only that, the lower castes and the scheduled tribes, which are groups that are already socially disadvantaged and discriminated against to a lesser or greater extent, accounted for almost another 30% of the population. Only the general castes are those who do not suffer prejudice and enjoy privileges. And as you can see, in 2011, they barely accounted for 30.7% of the population. It was, and still is, the privileged group at the expense, to a large extent, of the rest of the country. But we don't have to go that far back. Obviously, things are not so bad now, but even in 2021, this system still had, for example, a high incidence of poverty. In terms of health, nutrition, years of schooling, sanitation or housing, whichever way you look at it, belonging to a low caste or tribe or to the untouchables group is still synonymous with having many more problems and worse living conditions. In other words, the gap has not closed, and if it is not closed, it is because of the influence of the system which still persists.
Overall, 5 out of 6 people in multi-dimensional poverty in India live in households headed by a person belonging to a scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, or other backward class. Multi-dimensional Poverty Index, MPI 2021.
And keep in mind that if the Indian population exceeds 1.4 billion inhabitants, we are talking about close to 1 billion people who have a harder time than the rest due to a simple question of lineage. And I am not referring to the wealth of families, but to their ability to advance their professional, social, and even political positions according to their own merits. Really, it's crazy. And you know what? This is where we get to the key part of this video. Despite all the progress achieved by the government's increasing persecution, the main problem that constitutes the cause of the social stratification has to do precisely with the loss of human capital that it entails. And let's not forget that human capital is an absolutely indispensable variable for a country to develop. Visual Politic viewers, we may be talking about a gigantic opportunity cost both for Indians and for the rest of us in the world. Check this out.
The potential in the shadows.
When we take a look at the Indian education system, the first thing that we find in primary and secondary school is that the difference between the various social groups is also quite remarkable. 3/4 of students are part of the untouchables or the socially disadvantaged castes and tribes, which makes sense. Poorer families continue to have more children, and we have already seen that the caste system continues to have a big impact on poverty data. Be that as it may, the problem is that this also determines their educational performance. Children from these families have higher school dropout rates. This obviously entails an enormous opportunity cost. Yes, it is true the data have improved decade after decade, but there are still significant differences. And if we go to the higher levels, the differences are even greater. It is here that we find 2 totally different faces. On the one hand, India is, according to UNESCO, the country with the highest number of students in secondary school, as you can see, almost twice as many as China. And that is great news. A more educated population usually translates into better jobs and faster development. And not only that, India is also one of the countries in the world where university students are more inclined towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics majors. On the other hand, because of the caste system, it is very likely that about half of all these high school students mentioned above will not be able to access university studies or quality vocational training. This is a huge waste of talent. In fact, this dreaded social classification system is still so entrenched that its effects have even reached the United States itself. And not just anywhere. It is suspected that it is even beginning to have an impact in Silicon Valley. Hang on, do you think we've gone crazy? I mean, the United States and the caste system? Well, see for yourselves, because that's exactly what explains news stories like these.
India's engineers have thrived in Silicon Valley, so has its caste system. How tech giants are importing India's caste legacy to Silicon Valley. Last year, a Dalit graduate of IIT Bombay filed a lawsuit in the US against Cisco Systems Inc. and two of his classmates, saying he had suffered caste-based discrimination.
Okay, maybe it's just a couple of isolated cases, maybe not, because the truth is that in recent years, dozens of Indian engineers working abroad, particularly in the United States, have taken this issue to court, which at the very least, we could say, is pretty significant. In fact, this particular cultural export could have its origin in the Indian Institutes of Management and the Indian Institutes of Technology. These institutions were created by the Indian government in the 1960s and today are the creme de la creme of the university system. Now, although they do have a quota system to allow access to some students from the least favoured castes, the majority of places are occupied by the most favoured social groups. Visual politic community, the caste system has been officially persecuted since the 1970s, but despite this, it continues to have an enormous influence on Indian society. Families of lower lineage under the system tend to be poorer, their children have a higher rate of educational failure, and much more difficulties being hired in a good job. It is, so to speak, a stain that sticks with them for life. Not surprisingly, this can lead to many problems: inequality, frustration, and eventually even social unrest. It seems unbelievable, but this is still an issue that India has to take very seriously. But at this point, the questions are over to all of you. What do you think of this particular system of social classification? Why do you think that no government has managed to eradicate it? What would they have to do to put an end to it once and for all? As always, you can leave us your answers and your impressions in the comments below. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to all of us here at Visual Politic if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. What can I say? One of the questions was, what do I think why the government didn't eradicate that caste system yet? It's because it's ingrained in their culture for thousands of years. 50 years is not going to do it. They need more time and be more, maybe not strict, but basically more educating, putting more kind of pressure on actually putting people from the lower castes higher, you know, if they are talented and they're good workers and stuff like that. Yeah, what do you think? Did you find that interesting? Thank you very much for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye!